Once again, hockey fans, and welcome to another episode of Anatomy of a Season. And in this series, I have covered 3 Stanley Cup champion clubs, the 92-93 Montreal Canadiens, the 96-97 Detroit Red Wings, and the 82-83 New York Islanders. But a friend of mine said, "Oh, Bill, all you do is cover champions." Well, after these episodes, and just 3 in total, I didn't realize I was getting that repetitive already. So I asked myself, who should I cover next? If I'm covering too many champions, should I go the other end of the spectrum? Well, the answer to that is yes. I decided to go from great teams to one of the absolute worst. Oh, yes. The 1989-90 Quebec Nordiques. Just take a look at this picture. It's like picture day in grade 9. You're trying so hard to look a certain way in order just to fit in and not get picked on. Oh, I've seen less forced smiles than a prison mugshot. Not counting Guy Lafleur, as I'm sure his thought of the 5 Stanley Cup rings and Hall of Fame induction ring he has waiting at home for him are making him quite happy. But since context is key, and we gotta wonder how the Nords actually got this bad. As a matter of fact, they weren't always this bad. Far from it, actually, during the 1980s. It's backstory time! The Quebec Nordiques, however, did not start in the NHL. They indeed started in the rival WHA in the 72-73 season. They had such great star players over the years as Serge Bernier, Marc Tardif, Ray-Jean Houle, Réal Cloutier, and Richard Brodeur. They won the Avco Cup, the league's major championship, in 1976-77. However, by 1979, the WHA was history, and the Nordiques, along with the Edmonton Oilers, the New England Whalers, who become the Hartford Whalers, and the Winnipeg Jets, all joined the league. The Nords' first year in the NHL wasn't a great one. However, in a story that could have been a made-for-TV movie, the Stastny brothers, Peter and Anton from Czechoslovakia, defected to Canada to join the Nords. Anton was an excellent hockey player, but Peter was on a whole other level, setting an NHL record at the time for being the first rookie to reach 100 points in a season. Along with emerging young talents such as superstar left winger Michel Goulet, pesky aggressive power forward Dale Hunter, as well as defenseman Pierre Lacroix, this team had a good young crop of talent, and they could build on that. It also still had its veteran presence with forwards such as Jacques Richard, Marc Tardif, and Réal Cloutier, while defenseman Andre Dupont brings that veteran presence, and so does star goaltender Dan Bouchard. The 2 men to steer the ship going forward into the 1980s was general manager Maurice Fillon and head coach Michel Bergeron, known as Bergie. Well, they made the playoffs for the first time in 1980-81, and in 81-82 they were a winning club, and added the eldest Stastny brother, Marion, to the team. As well as power forward Will Paymont, they had a growing defense as well with Norm Rochefort and tough guy Mario Marois. They built a heated rivalry with the Montreal Canadiens, upsetting the Habs in 1982 and 85, both times making it to the conference finals but falling short of the Stanley Cup. They lost to the Habs in 1984, however, which culminated in a Game 6 deemed the Good Friday Massacre, as seen here. It looked as if by 1985-86 the Nords were ready to take the reins and finally get to the big dance. Peter Stastny had become one of the best players in the league with 6 consecutive 100-point seasons. Michel Goulet was actually easily the best left winger in the game at this time, and they had a promising defense and a hot young goaltender in Mario Gosselin now, as Dan Bouchard had left the team and later retired. With Bergie and Fillon's vision looking like it may come to fruition, after they had finished first in their division for the very first time, it was not to be. They suffered a huge upset, getting swept up by the underdog Hartford Whalers. Then the cracks began to show. In 1986-87, they made the playoffs again, but with a losing record. And while they got revenge on Hartford in the opening round in an upset of their own, the Habs would beat Quebec in 7 games. Stastny's 100-point streak came to an end, but that was mainly due to injuries. Anton Stastny left the team at the end of the season, and Marion was already long gone. They also lost star forward John Ogrodnik, who they actually gave up a lot to acquire that year. The defense wasn't very consistent despite good games from Norm Rochefort, and their goalies were not developing beyond what they already were. Many of Fillon's decisions were called into question, and many felt Bergie was losing control of the team. Well, he was actually let go after this season. And the biggest blow came at the end of the year, however. At least, it was a blow at the time. Nobody knew what the future held. But trading Dale Hunter to the Washington Capitals in a trade for Gaetan Duchesne and Alan Howarth, who were both 2 very talented forwards but would only play a combined 222 games with the Nordiques. But this is the key of the trade. They got a first-round draft pick out of the deal. And indeed, Burnaby, BC native and star of the Swift Current Broncos, Joe Sakic. Now, before you attack me and say, but Bill Hunter had to be traded for this to work. Yes, indeed, you're right. And now we have the benefit of hindsight, and it worked. But that being said, however, trading Hunter at the time was not the best decision. For Sakic to be a presence, I understand that this had to happen, but still, you gotta understand the way this looked at the time and the way it would hurt the Nordiques for years to come, well, that's still gotta be addressed. But, be that as it may, this had little to do with drafting Sakic at that point, and more to do with losing Hunter. Filion, however, didn't have this kind of luck before, but let's take a look at Quebec's first-round draft picks dating back to 1980. In 1980, their draft pick was traded to Chicago. They drafted future Hall of Famer Denis Savard. Ouch. In 1981, they drafted a strong, tough defenseman, Randy Muller, who was a very good hand and a fan favorite among Nordiques fans for many years, but sadly, Filion and Berge had an obsession with this type of player that led to their defense never fully becoming the force it could have been. Muller did play 7 seasons and played 508 games, culminating in a plus 53, which he's actually turned out to have a pretty decent career. So he definitely wasn't not a flop, but picked 4 spots later, Al McInnes. In 1982, it was David Shaw, another defenseman, and you could see they were smartly trying to build a defense now at this point, but he only played a few seasons for Quebec, 165 games, it was a minus 28. And Quebec did have a strong power play, and they could have built on that even further. That they drafted Dave Anderchuk, another future Hall of Famer, who went 3 picks later to Buffalo. Speaking of Buffalo, that's who Quebec's first-round draft pick went to, and they picked Adam Creighton, who went on to have a decent career, playing over 700 games. In 1984, it was gritty forward out of Guelph, Trevor Steinberg, who spent most of his career in the minors, played 71 games, scoring 12 points again. The year where defenseman would have been smart, Kevin Hatcher was taken 2 picks later. 1985, to be fair, was not a great year in general for the draft, but they took Dave Alata, who only played 36 games and had 12 points, but had more success in Europe. But I will say, Quebec, much like every other team in this draft, so it's not just on them, overlooked Joe Nieuwendyk, who was finally picked up by Calgary. In 1986, another weak year, they picked up Ken McRae, who is still with the team going into 1989-90, but has only played 38 games and put up 17 points. 7 picks later, Adam Graves is taken by the Rangers. The thing is, in 1987, Sakic wasn't even their first-round pick. They had 2 that year. They used the first to take defenseman Brian Fogarty, who is in the AHL but will be on the team going into this season. Oh, will he ever. They passed up, however, on Stefan Quintel, who, again, was not what you call a Hall of Famer, but he played 1,000 games and was a very reliable defenseman. They then took Sakic. The one time the first round didn't come back to bite Filion. And it's not just him. The Nordiques scouting team was also called into question at this point, as their player development system was also pretty bad. And many of their draft picks were just collecting dust in the minors and not producing on the main roster when they had the chance. In 1987-88, they missed the playoffs for the first time since their first NHL season in 1979-80, though Stastny and Goulet each had 100-point seasons, but the rest of the team was in disarray. In 1988-89, Maurice Filion had taken a new job as vice president of the team, and Martin Madden became the general manager and drafted Curtis Leschyshyn, a very good pick and was the best defenseman in that first-round class. He would go on to have an excellent career, but at this time, look at this, they passed up Jeremy Roenick, Rod Brindamore, and Teemu Selanne. Sakic played his rookie year and had 62 points in 70 games and received some Calder Trophy votes, some say not enough. Peter Stastny was still playing pretty well, but not at the level that we were used to seeing. Goulet missed 11 games due to injuries and actually had a lackluster year even when healthy. They had a talented scoring forward in Walt Podubny, but the team lacked any real depth. Their defense was bad, their goaltending was weak, and they had 2 head coaches throughout the season, and Jean Perron, the latter of the 2, would not be back. Maurice Filion had stepped back from, of course, his GM duties and taken vice president's job, like I said. So, but who's going to be the new coach, though? Michel Bergeron? What the f***? Look, I know the man is a good coach, but he ended up becoming a part of the problem in the end as well. He had come off a stint coaching the New York Rangers, which was moderately successful, getting them back into the playoffs in the 88-89 season. And look, he brought someone with him as a free agent. Haha. Yes, the already Hall of Fame inducted Guy Lafleur, who I just recently covered on this channel, is fresh off his comeback with the Rangers. And while it is known that he won't be the Guy of old, he can provide veteran leadership and still rack up quite a few points. He is best known, of course, for his iconic days at Montreal, scoring over 500 goals, and is now approaching 1,300 points. He has 5 Stanley Cup rings to his credit, 2 MVPs, 3 Players' Choice MVP, as a Pearson Trophy winner, 3 scoring titles, 6-time First Team All-Star, 6 consecutive times, I should say, 5 All-Star Game appearances, Consummate Trophy for Playoff MVP in 1977, 6 100-point/50-goal seasons, a Canada Cup win in 1976, an appearance in the 1981 Canada Cup, as well as the World Championships that year, and played in the 1979 Challenge Cup. He was also inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1988, around the time of his comeback, and oh yes, an insane career plus 471. Then came draft day, June 17, 1989, and the Nords had the first overall pick. And hey, Madden made a beauty. European hockey was starting to make waves at this point, and scouts were finally taking notice. And the Nords picked the first ever European-born player to go number 1 in the draft, and that is Mats Sundin, a highly skilled center out of Sweden. Well, this draft class overall for the NHL wasn't the best, but there's no way Quebec will have that much to go. Wait, Adam Foote in the second round? Huh. Well, yes, needless to say, playing over 1,100 games and winning 2 Stanley Cups and a gold medal, and probably being the most underrated defenseman of his era. I'd say spending all but 3 seasons of his 19 with the franchise, I'd say this was a huge grab. However, we would see neither Sundin nor Foote this season. The rest of their picks, however, would only play a combined 98 games for the Nordiques, and to be fair, they made some great picks. As with the fall of the Iron Curtain imminent, they chose 3 Soviet national superstars and obtained their rights in hopes that they would defect to the NHL, which a lot of NHL teams were doing at this point in later rounds and had been doing it actually for quite a few years. But sad for the Nordiques' luck, the only one who defected was goaltender Sergei Milnikov, a holder of an Olympic gold medal from 1988 and a World Championship title, who will indeed be on the team this year. Still though, those first 2 picks, wow. But GM Martin Madden didn't stop there on draft day, making a big trade. Well, actually, first, not so big trade, getting rid of goaltender Bob Mason, sending him back pretty much where they got him from, to Washington, for future considerations that never really panned out, though Mason would only play in 16 more NHL games. The big draft day trade, however, was they parted way with their leading goal scorer from 1988-89, Walt Podubny, and a 1990 4th-round draft pick for tough grinding forward Claude Loisel and veteran defenseman Joe Cirella, and an 8th-round draft pick. Nords fans were not really a big fan of this trade. Look, Loisel is a good hand to have on a team, but was he really worth risking your top scorer? Earlier in his career with Detroit, he bounced around between the team and minors. However, he did have success in the minor leagues as a big part of the 1986 Calder Cup champions, the Adirondack Red Wings. And after 5 seasons in the Red Wings system in and out of the team, he found a steady home in New Jersey for 3 seasons. In parts of 8 NHL seasons, he's had 62 goals, 78 assists for 140 points in 445 NHL games, and was a very dreary minus 50. He has 703 penalty minutes on top of that. He had greater success in the minors, however, with 114 points in 103 games in the AHL. The meat and potatoes of that trade, however, was Joe Cirella, a very reliable blue liner, who was a first-round draft pick, 5th overall in 1981. But again, it's Quebec's obsession with acquiring players who are tough and rack up penalty minutes. In 8 NHL seasons, he has played 503 NHL games, and while not normally an offensive defenseman, he's still racked up an impressive 209 points and 938 penalty minutes, but is an abysmal minus 156. But again, he is part of the Colorado Rockies / New Jersey Devils in the early to mid-80s. He's not the only one with these kind of stats. That's not all on him, and again, was a big part of the team's growth or lack thereof. However, he played in the 1984 NHL All-Star Game and was immensely popular among Devils fans and was key when the team actually finally got pretty good in 1988. And he did have good leadership skills. They also parted ways with Gaetan Duchesne and Kevin Kaminski, who would only ever play 6 games for the Nordiques. And the day the season was about to get underway, October 5th, 1989, Madden made another deal, parting ways with Randy Muller, sending him to the Rangers for, big shock, another defenseman who racks up penalty minutes. Look, I understand you're trying to build toughness, but come on! And they got Michel Petit, who I actually liked and was a pretty good defenseman, because Bergie loved him while coaching the New York Rangers, and I'm sure Madden had Filion in his ear. Well, it seemed like they were just acquiring the same type of players they were getting rid of or losing, trying to rediscover the age-old formula that gave them success back in the 80s. Petit spent most of his career with the Vancouver Canucks, playing 1 full season with the Rangers, and indeed is coming off perhaps the best season of his career, I will say. So here we go. The season is set to get underway. Bergie is back. Madden seems to be Filion's lapdog. Things look poised to repeat a tired formula that is broken. Well, they are putting all their eggs in the basket of sophomore Joe Sakic. A lot of pressure being a top young forward on a team like this. Peter Stastny is still productive, but he is aging, as is Michel Goulet. As great as Guy Lafleur once was, he's not going to be a game changer here. They had youngsters such as Mark Fortier and Mike Huff who were not really developing or advancing in their game. Role players such as Jeff Jackson, Greg Adams, and Lucien Deblois, well, all great seasoned veterans, but still not much in the way of a winner. In their defensive core, well, they have new acquisitions Petit and Cirella, who are very good, but again, are they really game changers for a team like this? And former Nordiques defenseman Mario Marois, who actually rejoins the team, he's a good grab from last year. He spent six successful seasons with the Nords in the 1980s and returned after a few seasons with the Jets, but again, was just the Nords visiting that tired old formula. Also, they had veteran Robert Picard, who, again, probably the Nords' best defenseman at this point, but actually, I think that title might go to Jeff Brown. Either way, they were the two best, and he had an offensive spark, but still hadn't fully developed a great defensive game. Also, you have Curtis Lashishin joining the team this year in his rookie year, and could become a top blue liner this season. And in goal, well, let's see here. Oh boy, will we start the season with two unproven goalies, rookie Stefan Fissette and sophomore Ron Tugnut, the latter of whom was deemed the team's #1 goalie. Also, their Stanley Cup odds are about what you'd expect. They're actually tied the Leafs, Islanders, and Stars to the second worst odds. The worst in the whole league, however, were the Jets. And the crazy coincidence is, well, spoiler, that all those teams they were tied with, and even the Jets who were worse than them in Stanley Cup odds, all made the playoffs. Okay, so here we go. Opening day, October 5th, 1989. It's the Quebec Nordiques visiting their division rivals, the Buffalo Sabres, led by the awesome scoring duo of Dave Andrechuk and Pierre Turgeon, and star defenseman Phil Housley. And the Nords looked decent in the opening game. Trailing 3-1 going into the third period, they made a game of it, thanks to Sakic and Goulet, but they came up short in a 4-3 loss, while young Stefan Fissette looked solid in the loss. Their home opener against Boston went really well. Hey, how about that? Huge gains from veterans Lafleur and Stastny, and Finnish import Eero Järvi led them to a big 4-1 win, and Tugnut was sensational in net. Hey, maybe perhaps we underestimated this much. Perhaps they're not quite as bad on paper as we thought. Perhaps they'll have a huge game against Hartford, and yeah, indeed, they have huge games with Sakic and Stastny, 4 points each. Sakic with a hat trick, the third already of his young career, and perhaps they'll begin a 4-game winless streak, losing this game to the Whalers 9-6. I'll tell you, I remember there was a time where the Whalers scoring 9 goals happened over the course of 3 or 4 games. But hey, they played much better, however, just giving up 4 goals against the Flyers. So how about that? They looked even better just giving up 3 goals. Way to go, boys! And a loss to the North Stars 3-2. But hey, great news. They scored 8 goals in the next game in an 8-8 tie against defending Stanley Cup champion Calgary Flames. Yikes! Huge 4-point night, however, from Jeff Brown and Eero Järvi, and big 2-goal, 2-assist 4-point night from Peter Stastny. And the next game was actually a big one for the Nordiques. Not only did they end their winless stretch in a huge 5-3 road win in Chicago, but Peter Stastny, who entered the game with 998 career points and playing in just his 682nd career game, assisted on a Michel Petit goal to give the Nords a 2-1 lead in the second. And with 8 seconds to play in the game, Mike Huff fed Stastny the puck, who launched it into the empty net. Career point number 1,000. He became the first ever European-born player to reach the mark and beats Guy Lafleur's mark, his teammate Guy Lafleur that is, of the third fastest to ever reach it. Many thought since Stastny's scoring touch had diminished, Jari Kurri would actually become the first European player to reach this mark, but he would reach it later that season and become the 4th fastest to ever reach it in history to boot. Stastny was given a hero's welcome in a pregame ceremony as the Nords went home to host the Minnesota North Stars. And say what you want about this faltering of this team, Stastny deserves the adulation. And he continued his hot streak, 2 goals, 2 assists, 4-point night against the Stars, as Lafleur was showing shades of his old self with 3 assists. And Jeff Brown looked sharp to boot. And hey, the Nords are 3-4-1, not great, but certainly far from awful. The Stars are doing, they're doing their thing on this team, and veterans are producing. Tugnut is making some great saves in net. Even the defense is starting to gel just a little bit. I mean, you know what? I have to say this team is going on a 4-game losing streak to end October. 2-0 loss to Hartford, as Sakic has actually begun to struggle a little bit. Fissette is sent back to his junior club in Victoriaville, Quebec, while Sergei Milnikov made his first NHL start, and he played pretty well, making 31 saves in a 4-2 loss against Boston. Next was a 6-3 loss to Edmonton. Sakic broke his scoring drought, but now Stastny hadn't scored in 3 games. It was an abysmal -3, as was Jeff Brown. And then a 5-3 loss to Chicago, where Stastny broke his mini slump. The Nords start the season 3-8-1. Yes, that's bad. Quite bad. But I mean, they were only 4 points behind 4th place Boston at this point. Hey, this is likely as bad as things will get, right? Let's see. The fact is, Bergie is shuffling lineups constantly and not sticking to any formulous lineup to see if they work in the long term. And to be fair, this team does have some battling injury issues. Look, this team may look hopeless, but should they settle for that? I mean, yeah, I mean, they're just making the situation worse already on top of the injuries, and Goulet was actually set to miss a few games going into November. Well, it's no surprise that the top 3 forwards are the top 3 forwards in scoring, but Stastny was playing like the Stastny of old for the most part. 19 points in 12 games, not to mention reaching a 1,000 career point. His 7 goals were the best on the team all month. Sakic had his struggles, but was still sharp overall, as was Goulet. The veterans were a big help as Sakic continues to progress, and Guy Lafleur, who himself had a great month, looking to help this, looking a little like his old self, mentoring the youngster. Now we move on to defense and plus minuses. Joe Cirella is so far proving to be a kind of a win in this trade. He's only one of 2 players to finish on the plus side in plus minus for Quebec and led the team with a +5 and is playing some really good hockey. Jeff Brown, to no surprise, has a decent month leading all defensive scoring with 7 points. Petit played well in some games, while Picard also looked good in some nights as well, but Leschyshyn was having trouble finding his groove, and Marwal just had very little presence at this point. And finally, goaltending. Tugnut is a workhorse, a decent 3-4-0, and a goals against average of 3.30, not bad on a team like this. Fiset looked strong in his first start, but it looked like it was just too much too soon for the youngster, who again was sent back to his junior club. And in his first NHL start, Sergei Milnikov looked good, turning away some big shots. I'd like to say things are going to turn around in November, but no. The 4-game losing streak that ended October turns into 4 more losses, chiseling 8 in a row. Stéphane Fiset was recalled from juniors just in time for a 6-1 loss to the Rangers. Cirella, Petit, Stastny, and Lafleur all played brutally to boot. A 5-2 loss to the Blues followed, and then they were shut out by the Capitals. And then 2 goals from Järvi didn't help matters, as Stephen Finn was particularly bad in a 6-3 loss to the Devils. Sakic and Stastny do not play well in this stretch either, and neither does anyone else really, quite frankly, and Goulet is still out with an injury. While the lineup shuffling continued as Yaroslav Sevcik is now called up, and Michel Petit is injured to boot, and here comes Brian Fogarty. The Nords' losing ways, however, come to an end in a win over the New York Islanders, who were struggling themselves, and it was a big road win, 7-5 over the Isles. Stastny scores his 16th career hat-trick, and Tugnut was bombarded, but made a huge 44 saves in the victory. And hey, would you look at that? 2 in a row! And Quebec plays a great defensive game. Stastny plays well with just under 5 minutes to play. Guy Lafleur scored a power play goal, which proved to be the game winner, and a 3-2 win. And going into a home game against the Winnipeg Jets, chances of a 3rd in a row were creating a buzz. As a matter of fact, I have Michel Bergeron's pregame speech right here. Excuse me. Yeah, okay, here it is, okay. Okay, guys, we won against the Islanders on Thursday. That was 1. 2 days ago, we beat the Canucks. That's 2 in a row. If we beat the Jets tonight, it's called a winning streak. It has happened before. Okay, I may have made that up, and may have also been paraphrasing a line from Major League 2, but still, it sounds like something like that needs to be said at this point, and I wouldn't doubt it was close to that. And indeed, it has happened before, but not tonight. The North's 2-game hot streak comes to a halt. A 5-3 loss to the Jets followed, and to make matters worse, Lafleur will miss 4 to 6 weeks, and joins both Goulet and Petit on the injury list. And they got a whole lot worse, being outscored 16-3 in 2 games. Fiset gets recalled to get humiliated in a loss to Mario Lemieux and the Penguins, while Tugnut gets lit up so much he got sunburned from the red goal light behind him in a loss to Stevie Y and the Red Wings. But hey, Goulet is back at least. And Joe Sakic comes live with 2 goals as Goulet, Järvi, and Cirella all play well, and they fight to another tie with defending Cup champion Calgary. Sakic scored a beautiful goal with 1:26 to play to tie the game, a goal that made fans cheer the loudest they had all season. So Fiset is again sent back to juniors, and Mario Brunetta gets called up from minor league affiliate Halifax. The 4th goaltender they've used already this season, and it's a game against Hartford, and he actually plays pretty well in a 29-save performance in a 4-2 win over their division rival, as it was tied 2-2 late, and Brown and Goulet scored 2 late goals to get the surprise win. Yeah, they were looking good against Buffalo, but lose due to a Pierre Turgeon goal with 16 seconds left to play. This begins a 4-game losing streak again to end the month, followed by a 3-1 loss to the Rangers, despite a solid game from Brunetta in net. Then came a home-and-home series with the Habs, the Battle of Quebec, which at this point was more of a one-sided police action, and the Habs take both games easily, 5-2 at home and 6-2 in Quebec. Well, hey, they equaled their win total from October, but lost more games. However, tons of injuries to likes of Goulet early in the month, Lafleur mid-month, Petit missing all but 2 games this month. Plus, continuous lineup shuffles continued to hurt the Nordiques, and towards the end of the month, Stastny grew cold, as did Goulet after looking hot after his return. Not even their top scorers could average a point a game, which in this era, even the basement clubs did better than that quite often. Sakic and Stastny pretty much had parallel numbers, with 6 goals and 6 assists for 12 points each leading the way, while Jeff Brown, the top scoring defenseman, and Finnish import Eero Järvi each had 8 points. Järvi was the definition of hot and cold and injured or not. Again, injuries again to Lafleur and Goulet did not help. So yes, Brown pretty much has the exact same numbers, only an assist and point more than he had the month before. And not one player on the Nords finished on the plus side in November. The best they had were Lafleur and defenseman Robert Picard, the latter of whom was definitely their best blue liner all month, while injuries to Petit and Marwal hindered the club further, as Lafleur and Picard each had an even 0. 4 different goaltenders played this month. Tugnut was being bombarded, but despite some okay numbers in the opening month, they were anything but with a 2-6-1 and a goals against average of nearly 5. But he's 1952 Terry Sawchuk compared to Stefan Fiset. Oh boy, he would not play another game all year. Thank God. A goals against average of 7. Even a mediocre goaltender of this era like Greg Billington could do better than that, with sleeping in the crease with no equipment on. Ugh. And Milnikov played 1 game and lost, and well, that's that. And Brunetta was probably their best netminder this month with a goals against average of nearly 3.5, but actually looked really good in his win. The 1998 Ice Storm was nicer to Quebec than any of the teams were to the Nordiques in the month of December. In order to add depth to their team, however, they acquired one of the biggest draft busts of all time, Brian Lawton. A first overall draft pick who was a good hand to have on a given team, mind you, don't get me wrong, but definitely was not going to make much of a shakeup or a difference, or at least so we thought. He has played 7 seasons, and in 381 games has 90 goals, 118 assists for 208 points. Not terrible whatsoever, and a decent career +5. But he was well below expectations of what he should have been as a first overall pick for the North Stars in 1983. He played 5 seasons with the Stars and a brief stint with the New York Rangers, and spent the last 2 seasons, or at least parts of them, with the Hartford Whalers before being released. And he also has vast international experience as a member of the U.S. national team in the past, and represented Team USA in the 1984 Canada Cup and the 1987 World Championships. He only had 3 points in 13 games and was a -2 with the Whalers this season. And hey, Quebec fans had something to cheer about, and that would be Mario Lemieux being awesome as he scored a hat-trick en route to Pittsburgh's 7-4 win along with Kevin Stevens' 3 points. Lawton was a terrible -3 in his debut, and, well, it's nowhere near as bad, however, as minor league call-up Max Middendorf, cool name, however, he was a -5. Martin Madden was trying to make anything work and made a trade on December 4th, 1989. He traded away veteran forward Greg Adams, who spent most of the season in the minors, and Robert Picard, the veteran defenseman who is still among the best in the team, to Detroit for veteran forward Tony McKegney. Okay, Quebec thought they needed more goals, and this wasn't the worst idea, and it's definitely nothing against McKegney, who has vast veteran experience and is very underrated. He is now in his 12th season, and in 805 games, has scored over 300 goals and has close to 600 points. Indeed, has always been a very reliable goal scorer. He's even reached the 40-goal mark once, 30-goal mark 3 other times, and has at least reached 20 goals 5 other times. He's a very impressive +71 to top it off, and was always popular with teammates wherever he played. He has been consistent throughout most of his career, spending most of it with Buffalo, where he started, with stints in Quebec. Yes, the Norths had him once already, plus the North Stars, time that really didn't pan out too well for him, the Rangers, and the Blues, and this year with Detroit, where he wasn't actually playing all that well, which was 3 points in 14 games, but was still a +2. But the North's defense, as weak as it is, and Picard, along with Brown, was one of their best. This was definitely a huge risk for the Nordiques. Indeed, the Nords looked better in a 3-3 tie against the Bruins, where we saw the return of Michel Petit, and Losel had 2 goals, but Quebec blew a 3-1 lead with 6:15 to play, and had to settle for a tie. It's quite the opposite in the next game, as McKegney suits up finally, and plays very well, but Sakic was the star of the night. 2 goals, 2 assists for 4 points against the Flyers, and down 6-4, which is 23 seconds ago, Sakic scores his first ever penalty shot, And Le Colisée erupts in joy, and then 16 seconds later, with 7 seconds left and an extra skater, they tie the game, and it would stay that way after DeBlois scores a biggie. However, they lose 8-4 in the next game to the LA Kings as Gretzky and Robitaille decimate Tugnut, who's being more lit up than Charlie Sheen on a bender in this era. And Lawton, however, was actually playing very well so far despite his rough debut for the team, and Marois had returned as well. But on December 13th, Madden made another trade. He parted ways with Jeff Brown, again, who along with Picard has been their best defenseman in the last 2 seasons, in exchange for young forward Tony Herkak and veteran goaltender Greg Millen. Nothing against these players, but their 2 best defensemen on an already weak defense in the last 2 seasons they're now gone, and they didn't get a defenseman for either of them. Look, Herkak was not a bad grab. He's a solid defensive forward with solid checking abilities. And in 3 seasons, he has 110 points in 165 games, all played with the St. Louis Blues. And was playing pretty well this season with 17 points in 28 games and was a +1. And I'll admit, the Nordiques needed a veteran goalie. Yeah, Milnikov had experience, but no NHL experience. Millen has 12 NHL seasons under his belt, and as you can see, his stats aren't overly stellar. A record of 204, 263, and 84, and a goals against average of 3.85, and a very so-so 8.74 save percentage. Although he does have a bronze medal for Team Canada for the 1982 World Championships, and 17 career shutouts, which is actually not a bad number in this era. And to add context, however, I should say Millen spent the majority of his career on terrible teams with lousy defenses, and most of his time with the Blues, he's played with a much better defense, even if not the best still. And he thrived a bit better in St. Louis than he had his whole career with Pittsburgh and Hartford. And it was a very hard-working netminder. As a matter of fact, he was having quite a good season with the Blues this year, with an 11-7-3 record, and a very good goals against average under 3, and a good 8.90 save percentage. But see, here's the problem. Millen thrives the most with a good defense. Quebec just got rid of their 2 best defensemen. But it was Milnikov who got the start against the Oilers in a 5-1 loss, beginning a Western road swing. And we hit 10 games without a win. An absolutely brutal 8-2 loss against Calgary, where Stastny was out of action, and Herkak makes his debut with the Nords scoring a goal, and being humiliated by defending champion Flames, led by Nieuwendyke's hat-trick and a 5-point night each from Suter and Roberts. And, yeah, let's just say the Nords weren't able to shoot the side of a barn, let alone any pucks on Mike Vernon. But hey, look at this, a tie! Ooh, and back to reality with a 6-1 loss to the Kings. Guy Lafleur returned and notched 3 assists, while Goulet played one of the best games he's played all year with a 3-point night. Lawton also notched his 3 points. And Norris put up a huge fight against the Sabres with their comeback bid, fell short in a 6-5 loss, and to their credit, it was actually the most cohesive they looked all year, win or lose. And then Stastny returned. Tugnut played great, as did Sakic in a 3-3 tie with the Whalers. But now the winless streak has hit 14 games. They haven't won a game in over a month. Oy vey. But then to end the calendar year of 1989... Oh yes! Happy day! A 6-3 win over the New York Islanders. Stastny is back to form. Sakic continues to stay hot. Lafleur is flowering, and Greg Millen, in his first start as a Nordique, makes some huge saves, 32 in total, and gets the win. Well, the crazy thing is, 6 points is only 1 less than they had the month before. But of course, that huge winless streak, Lafleur is still out most of the month, Stastny out and struggling somewhat, and trading their 2 best defensemen, and basically these trades were short-term solutions to long-term problems, the Nords were now 20 points out of a playoff spot. Well, I gotta say, Sakic, in a word, was brilliant. Playing his most focused hockey so far of his young career. Despite his team's woes, he played with extra determination. 19 points in 11 games. The pundits were taking notice of the silver lining in Quebec's very dark cloud. Stastny, Michel Petit, and Brian Lawton all tied with 7 points, each having 3 goals and 4 assists. Stastny, however, did miss a few games and overall looked better than the last month, despite certain numbers being down, while Lawton has proven to be a pretty decent acquisition. Although Lafleur is rolling since his return, and Goulet, however, has struggled, and McKegney is not playing great overall, despite a couple good games. We will give kudos to Michel Petit this month after his return from injury to carry a heavier load on defense after losing both Brown and Picard. But overall, the blue line was about as useful as a poopy-flavored lollipop. While Ashishin finally played some decent games, Marois was very ineffective, and Fogarty was a team worst -16. This guy's a first-round draft pick. Speaking of plus-minus, 13-year veteran Lucien DeBlois was a +3 on the team and is the team's best that month, the only player on the plus side of things. In the goaltending, look at Ron Tugnut. He says more shots a game than just about anyone. These numbers are terrible, but yet again, when you get rid of your two best blue liners, you're going to suffer. Milnikov still can't find his first win, or the puck for that matter, in his glove or block or anywhere. Millen looked excellent in his first start, which has the Nords' only win of the month, breaking that 14-game unbeaten streak, and Brunetta made some relief appearances as the Nordiques addressed 5 goalies now this year. Well, it wasn't exactly a happy new year for the Nordiques, despite a 4-3 lead against Toronto late. Sakic having another huge night with 2 goals and 3 points total. With 5:27 left, the Leafs tied it. With 39 seconds left, Mark Osborne would score the game winner. Stastny also played well, as did Millen and net again, being bombarded like most Nord goalies. They followed this loss with 2 more, 4-1 to the Wings and 5-2 to the Islanders. But then the Nords rebounded huge with a 5-2 win over their heated rivals, the Montreal Canadiens. A huge game from Goulet with 3 points. Well, Sakic is still killing it. Huff, Herkak, and Petit played pretty well, and Millen was solid in net, something that gave their fans a little something to cheer for. But what followed was 2 more losses, 3-1 to the Bruins, and losing a back-and-forth battle with the Devils, 5-4. But then what followed after that was a wild 8-6 shootout with the Jets on the road, and the Nords grab another win. Hey, big games all around. Losell with 4 points, with a goal and 3 assists. Lawton has another huge game with 3 points. Jeff Jackson also has 3 with the best game of his young career. Sakic, Lafleur, Goulet all looking great. But it was the big breakout game for young prospect defenseman Curtis Leschyshyn, who is a +5. They still, however, couldn't sustain the momentum as they lost 7-4 to the North Stars, despite another big game from Goulet. But then came the All-Star break, and even when you're as lily as the Nords, every team has at least have 1 representative, and to the shock of literally nobody, Joe Sakic represents Quebec and will be the first of 12 All-Star game appearances throughout his illustrious career. He actually had 2 assists in the game, a very good showing, a special day for Sakic in an All-Star game that featured 24 future Hall of Famers, about 5 more you could still make an argument for. But sadly, it was back to reality a few days later, and the Nordiques will be the Nordiques and go on a 6-game losing streak to end the month that started with the North Stars. 9-2 shellacking from the Bruins. As Millen became the number 1 goalie as getting overworked. It would also be Brian Lawton's last game with the Nordiques since he was let go. What? I mean, he was actually playing pretty well. It's puzzling to say the least, but hey, Martin Madden will be Martin Madden. So, of course, after allowing 9 goals the night before and starting all but 1 game this month, they play Millen again. He allows 7 in a loss to the Habs. And hey, he now totals allowing 31 goals in 4 games. Lovely. And dating back to the win in Winnipeg, that's 37 in 5 games. The Nordiques drop an 8-6 loss to Detroit despite big games with Stastny, Lafleur, Sakic, and Petit. Next up, home series with division rivals Buffalo, and Scott Gordon, goalie number 6 for the Nordiques this year, gets his first career start and looks pretty decent. But the Nords lose 5-2. Gordon gets to start again, stops 38 shots, Nordiques lose 6-3. Yep, this is really bad. In a meeting with team owner Marcel Abu, who is definitely not guilt-free in the way the Nords had ended up, he asked GM Martin Madden, can this team get any worse? To which Madden replied, well, how about a series of fines for good play? Maybe a $30,000 signing bonus to the guy voted least valuable player. You can imagine Madden's embarrassment when he realized that's not what Abu meant. And, okay, of course, I'm quoting the first Major League movie this time, and I mean, it's almost as getting funny as that very movie. Like, come on! Ugh. 2-11-0 for the month of January, 4 total points, their worst month yet, and that's saying something. And now 28 points out of a playoff spot, and while the Whalers had gotten better in recent years, there was a time where they were really bad, and now they finally earned the right to say to another team, boy, you suck. But now to those who didn't suck, as Sakic had another big month, while North's icons Goulet and Stastny were tied for second in scoring in the month, with 13 points each. Goulet is back to form, Stastny is staying consistent. Tony McKegney also looked very strong in many games, we will say this month, as did Guy Lafleur, but everyone else was all over the map and Järvi was injured. And the defense, the defense. Michel Petit led defenseman in scoring with 7 points, but he wasn't what you'd call stellar despite some decent games. The best defenseman of the month was definitely Mario Marois, and also Curtis Leschyshyn seemed to be heading in the right direction and progressing very well. But overall, blech, have I mentioned Brian Fogarty's minus 18. Oh yeah, he was worth hanging on to, but getting rid of Picard and Brown, oh yeah, definitely a great decision. Surprisingly, the two players who finished on the plus side of things, in the plus minus, but there's Claude Lassalle with a +4, and the leader of the month was Jeff Jackson, a hard-working checking forward. Had a really good month with a +6, and to go with 6 points, indeed. And the goalies. Oh, the goalies. Remember what I said about the thing that is plaguing Craig Millen most of his career, being in front of bad defenses and hindering his progress as a goaltender? Well, think about that, only worse. At this rate, he couldn't stop a bubble, let alone a beach ball. Well, okay, to be fair, he was facing over 30 shots a game, but eek. Tugnutt was battling injuries, but was also benched, and Millen got overworked. While Scott Gordon saw some promise, they might as well just coax Dan Bouchard out of retirement at this point. And indeed, Martin Madden was booted out as general manager on February 2nd, 1990, and his interim replacement, Maurice Filion. Okay, look, I'd make the whole insanity is repeating the same mistakes analogy, but it's not the worst decision at this time of the season when the playoff hopes are pretty much all but gone, officially, and I will say it's not a bad decision to make him the GM in an interim basis just to finish out the season. But Berge still has a job? Sure, not everything has gone wrong as his fault, but we're past the halfway point of the season and the Nordiques haven't even won 10 games yet. Ugh, even for an awful team, that's ridiculous. Anyway, the losing streak is extended to 7 games as February begins, a 5-1 loss to Hartford, and Lafleur is going to miss more action again. And their offense was completely buried. They played much better in a 3-2 loss to Boston, where Scott Gordon faced 52 shots, stopping 49 of them, but then... Oh, the humanity! Oh, yes, you're reading that correctly. A 12-2 loss against the Washington Capitals. And hey, great coaching, Berge, leaving poor Scott Gordon in to let in all 12 goals while the defense is playing like pylons. Oh my goodness. Such a spanking that even a dominatrix watching this game had to turn it off due to the pain. Literally, only 2 Washington skaters didn't register a point. One of them was Rod Langway, who very rarely ever did register points. Next up, 5-1 loss to Boston, 7-2 loss to Montreal, and indeed the losing streak has hit 11. Everyone is playing bad up and down the line to begin February, even Sakic, Goulet, and Stastny. Things are a disaster, and Filion, despite his interim status, is going to do something about it in the near future, as now trade talks are surrounding some of the big stars. Thankfully, however... the Nordiques reach win number 10! 2 goals each from Fortier, McKegney, and Sakic with a monster night with 3 assists. Also a great game from Herkak, and Scott Gordon gets his first career win, and they follow that triumph with a 9-2 loss to the Blues, where Millen got a very interesting 9-goal welcome back from his former team. And by late in the second period, the Nordiques were sucking wind so bad that fans in the first 3 rows passed out from oxygen deprivation. It'd be funny if it wasn't so sad. They followed that with a 7-1 loss to the Kings. Millen is great in net, but they come up short in a 3-2 loss against the Whalers, where Sakic and Stastny come alive again. Speaking of which, they both play great against the Habs, but lose 6-5, and it comes full circle, hey, with another loss to the Blues, 6-1. The losing streak, however, is broken in a win over Lemieux-less Penguins team. As the Nords were down 2-1 in the third period, Sakic sets up McRae's game-tying goal, and then sets up DeBlois' eventual power play game winner. Sakic, along with DeBlois and Petit, each had 2 points. Sakic has 2 more assists in a loss to a shockingly good Toronto team, 5-4 to end the month. 2-11 again this month. Filion is getting fed up and making it known, yet still keeps his buddy Berge employed. As many media pundits were shocked Berge wasn't fired after the 12-2 debacle against the Capitals. And yes, with a month to go in the season, keep in mind this is still the divisional format of the playoffs, the Nordiques were already eliminated. Hey, Sakic had another huge month and he's still playing great. Far and away their best scorer, and while he struggled early in the month, he was back to his old self soon enough. And while Stastny with 9 points at second and Goulet with 8 at third just seems it's all right, I guess. But Overall, the two Nordiques legends didn't seem to have much of a spark anymore, and Maurice Fillion was rumoring to shopping these two legends and icons in Quebec around. When the trade deadline was approaching, people were anticipating what would happen. Also, the Nords scored a combined 31 goals, which is their lowest all season. I mean, they even scored 45 the month prior. Yes, Petit led the defense in scoring, but overall his play was average at best in a few games. Lashishin had a bad month. Marwal was their best, but even he was maybe okay. And as a matter of fact, I'd say their best defensive player was actually defensive forward Tony Hurkacz, who had a good defensive game overall, and Mark Fortier, who led the team in goals all month with 6, as he and Hurkacz were tied with a +2. Oh hey, how about that? Only 2 goaltenders this month. Millen's past comes back to haunt him again, despite making some great saves that he faced over 30 shots a game still. Regardless, a month with no wins, a very rough one indeed, and a goals against average bordering on 6. While Scott Gordon played excellently in some game, he, like Millen, was just facing an unbelievable barrage, but he gets himself 2 wins. Well, we've at last made it to the final month, and March begins with a very competitive game for the Sabres as the trade rumors are swirling around both Stastny and Goulet. The Nords were down 3-1 in the third period as Gillis and Stastny scored 2 goals 46 seconds apart and fought to the tie. But it wasn't meant to be in the second part of the home-and-home series. They'd lose 5-3, though the last goal of the game was scored by Peter Stastny, the 380th of his career, all spent with the Nordiques, and it would be his last with them, his last game as a Nordique. Same with Goulet. It wasn't quite as spectacular, going pointless and was a -2. Indeed, the next day, on March 5th, 1990, they traded Goulet, along with Greg Millen. Yes, the veteran goalie they got rid of one of their best defensemen for already this year, and a 6th-round draft pick to the Chicago Blackhawks for left wingers Everett Sanapas, Dan Vincelet, and both young prospects in their early 20s. And, oh, look, a defenseman! Mario Doyon. First, Sanapas. He has size, he has toughness, and yes, racks up penalty minutes. He was actually a first-round draft pick by Chicago, and has scored just 43 goals in 126 games, and has over 300 penalty minutes, all played with Chicago over 3 complete seasons. And he has spent most of his time this season in the minors, and has only played 12 games this season for the Hawks. His minor league numbers are actually much better, playing for the IHL Saginaw Hawks and Indianapolis Ice, with 49 points in 56 games. This season, in his 12 NHL games, he has 4 points and 17 penalty minutes as Fillion's unhealthy obsession with these type of players continues. And hey, it continues even further with Dan Vincelet. Let's see, left winger check, size check, penalty minutes check. He has 137 games, only 11 more than Sanapas. 17 goals, the exact same as Sanapas. 32 points or 11 less. His -25 is 12 more worse than Sanapas, and hey, he too has spent a lot of time in the minor leagues with Saginaw and Indianapolis over the last 2 seasons, and played even better. They traded for 2 of the same damn player. Well, let's look at a young defenseman, which is something they might actually need. Okay, Mario Doyon, who definitely showed some promise, but has only played 7 NHL games, and yes, has also spent the last 2 seasons in Saginaw and Indianapolis, but actually has thrived in the IHL quite a bit, and seems to be developing very nicely. And this year, he had 34 points in 66 games and was a hard hitter. And hey, this is actually part of the trade that made sense. But yeah, these 3 would play a combined 86 games for the Nordiques. That's 6 games more than a regular season at this time. Fillion, yeah. Anyway, I take back what I said about giving this guy the job of the interim not being a bad thing. He hasn't learned anything. I mean, okay, I get it. The trade had to happen. They had to build for their future. When you get this bad, no matter how productive your legends might be, even on a lesser level, you need to tear down and start all over at times and build a team around a young star like Sakic. This was just terrible for the Nordiques. Goulet would actually play another 4 seasons after this one, all for the Chicago Blackhawks, and was able to make it to a Stanley Cup final in 1992 despite being in a losing cause, but sadly a severe head injury would end his career in 1994. And the Nords, well, they could have gotten much more. Even Goulet at this point was still worth a lot more than this, but teams knew how desperate they were and used it to their advantage. And I think Vincelet was the only one they were even able to get rid of in a trade. They didn't get much for him in return. Anyway, I digress. So the day of the trade deadline came on March the 6th, and the Nordiques fans waited with bated breath, and indeed, Peter Stastny's time in Quebec was up. He was traded to a growing New Jersey Devils team that needed veteran leadership in exchange for future considerations and defenseman Craig Wolanin. And again, Wolanin is a good defenseman, but again, he's in the vein of the defenseman they've already acquired. Good, far from great, but, it did make sense to reunite him with former teammate Joe Cirella, who is sadly injured at this point. In 5 seasons, Wolanin has played 283 games and has battled numerous injuries himself. He's a more traditional defenseman, so his 78 points is still pretty good. His minus 60 is not, but again, like I said about Cirella, look where he had spent most of his career. And hey, look at that, 469 penalty minutes. Wow, Theon doesn't really like his players being on the ice, does he? That being said, it didn't turn out to be the worst move for the team. Actually, despite Wolanin's injuries issues continuing over the course of his career, most of the time of which he spent with this team, he still proved to be productive and became a much more disciplined player. Well, the first game after the trade saw the 3 acquired from the Goulet trade all suit up, and Doyen scores a goal, and Vince Litt is a +1 while Santa Pass is a -2. Tugnut returns in goal, Yarvi returns the lineup, it's a 6-3 loss. Next game, Wolanin suits up for the first time as a Nordique in a loss to Washington. 4-3 is a lot better than 12-2. And Milnikov was back in net. And hey, we've already suited up 4 goalies this month that are playing just 2 all of last month. Next up, the Nords visit New Jersey, and Stastny plays against his former team and scores 2 goals and adds an assist for a 3-point night as the Nordiques are spanked 9-3. And they followed that up with a 4-1 loss to the eventual Stanley Cup champion Oilers, and then a 6-3 loss to Blackhawks. However, Goulet did not play in the game for the Hawks. He didn't get a chance to one-up his former team like Stastny just did, as he is injured. Now the Nordiques lose 6 in a row and are now winless in 8. And hey, look at that though, a 6-3 win over the Flyers, a monster 4-point night from Sakic, and Sergei Milnikov's first and only NHL win. Wolanin and Doyen have actually improved Quebec's defense a little bit, as Petit also plays a beauty. Hey, perhaps the Nords will finish the season strong in a... Oh god, who the hell am I kidding? They end the season on an 8-game losing streak. 8-3 loss to the Habs, where Milnikov let in 6 first-period goals. That was followed by a 4-1 loss to Hartford, and then in Milnikov's final game, he stopped 37 shots, but let in 7 goals in a 7-3 loss to the Bruins. Then Guy Lafleur returned to the lineup as they suffered a heartbreaking 4-3 overtime loss to the Leafs. Lafleur and Sakic play a beauty, but they lose 7-4 to the Rangers, followed by another loss to the Habs, this one 5-2. And despite being down 2-0 to Hartford, Quebec came back to tie only to lose 3-2, as goalie number 7 this year, John Tanner, makes his debut, stopping 27 shots. And the season mercifully comes to an end with a 5-2 loss to the Sabres. Well, fitting that they end their worst year in franchise history with their worst month, 1-14-1. Finishing the year 12-61-7 for 31 points, by far the worst record in the NHL that year. As a matter of fact, the second worst team all year was the Vancouver Canucks, who had more than double the wins and the points than the Nordiques. And since this season, only 2 have finished worse as of the 2021-2022 season. This team makes the Sabres of recent years look like the 1980s Oilers. Fillion went back to his office job, Berge was fired and never coached another NHL game again. Sakic was just unstoppable, however. He at least was giving fans something to cheer about, and hey, gave them a lot of hope for the future. His best month yet. 22 points, leading with 10 goals to boot. Goulet had the best month of his tenure in Quebec, but not only a great 11 points, but hey, an even 0 on the plus-minus side of things. McKegney had the last great run of games in his career with a 10-point month, and the only Nords forward all year to be among the top 3 monthly scorers that finished on the plus side with a +1. And hey, Petit goes from having many decent and mediocre months to the best he probably looked all season, as Craig Wolanin also proved to be a welcome addition to the blue line, leading the team with a +2 to end the season. Also, I gotta say, newcomer Mario Doyen played well, but we all know he doesn't really last, sadly, while Marois and Leschyshyn, however, did not play well. They suited up 5 goalies this month. Yeesh, and Tugnut returned to action, and judging by these numbers, I bet he wish he hadn't. And at least Milnikov got one NHL win before he went back to Russia, no doubt, telling his friends the horror stories about pro hockey in Quebec City, scaring many probably from defecting to the NHL. And hey, Millen played one more game and played it pretty well before he was part of the Goulet trade, but he never stood a chance in this team, while Gordon and Tanner also saw 1 game of action each. Well, you asked the opposite end of the spectrum, you got it. Careful what you wish for. You can say many things led to this team being a disaster. Bad management, yeah. Bad ownership, yeah. Questionable coaching, yeah. Injuries, for sure. Settling for players that won't make a difference, Bad trades? Feeble player development? Big time. Constant lineup changes almost weekly? And while the season has no happy ending, this story does, but I'll get to it in a second, as I go to the final stats. Well, it's a no-brainer. Joe Sakic led the team in scoring in a huge breakout year, and a preview of even better things to come from the youngster. 39 goals, 63 assists, 102 points, and his leadership skills were showing. He was popular among Quebec hockey fans with not just the skill on the ice, but the class he showed while doing it. And hey, Peter Stastny falls behind at second, which is also no surprise. Even though he in third place, Michel Goulet didn't finish the year with the team. They spent 10 and 11 years with the team respectively, always among pretty much the top two scorers every year. Stastny played well for the most part, but you could see nearing his mid-30s, he was going to be slowing down just a little bit. As for Goulet, you could also see injuries were hindering his once immense production. Other forwards were either injured or inconsistent, it seemed, all year, or in some cases, trying so hard to evolve but not having the right guidance to do so. Well, Sakic's 102 points were also tied for 10th best in the league, and look at that. Out of the 11, you have 9 NHL Hall of Famers. You can also make a huge argument for both Turgeon and Nichols, who still aren't in the Hall of Fame. As a matter of fact, Sakic is one of the few players in NHL history, as he's the only player in NHL history, to be on a team that had less than 15 wins and score 100 points. Well, on defense, it's a matter of the best of the worst, and it was Michel Petit, who, after the trades of Brown and Picard, he did have an unfair load to carry. He and Marois both. Fogarty was just plain bad. At least Lucian was showing promise in some games, but despite the questionable trade, Wolanin gave the team much relief, while Joe Sorella simply did okay most of the year. But speaking of Wolanin, his +2 was actually the best in the team. He only played 13 games for the Nordiques after being traded for Peter Stastny by the Devils. The goaltending. An NHL record 7 goaltenders dressed for the Nordiques, and well, needless to say, we really can't blame them all completely for these abysmal numbers. Tugnutt led the team in wins, with 5. He actually looked good in the first month. Actually, 3 of them came in the first month, and did play some great games. And despite his .524-3 record, he would actually play in the NHL until 2004, having a tremendous tenure from 96-97 to 99-2000 with the Ottawa Senators, and was also the first starting goaltender in Columbus Blue Jackets history. And despite the team being your typical expansion losers, he actually racked up some decent numbers while there, and retired with a respectable goals against average of just over 3. Greg Millen, the wasted trade, and poor Greg was thrust in that all too familiar situation that had plagued him most of his career. And while he was a part of Chicago's deep playoff run that year, after the trade he retired after the 91-92 season as a backup stint with Detroit, and has enjoyed a very successful broadcast career since on Hockey Night in Canada for the last 30 years. Scott Gordon showed he had potential but never fully developed his game, and played his last NHL game in 1991. Slavia star Sergei Milnikov's one and only NHL season was probably one he couldn't wait to forget, as he went back to Russia after this. John Tanner pretty much had the same fate as Gordon, playing his last game in 1992. Mario Brunetta, however, never played another NHL game after this season. Fiset, well, I'd say it got worse. He had it worse than just about anyone that year. A highly touted prospect who clearly wasn't ready for the pros at this point. However, he'd actually still have a decent NHL career, playing until 2002. Has some pretty decent years with the LA Kings. Around the same time Tugnutt was in Ottawa, but is also the tale of what could have been. And as you can guess, the Nordiques didn't win any major awards. However, Sakic, Stastny, and Lafleur all got some votes for the Lady Byng Trophy for excellence in sportsmanship. Sakic actually was not far off from being a finalist, finishing 5th, while Lafleur and Stastny had a vote each, and tying several others for 18th in voting. And you can probably guess by now who the future Hall of Famers on this team were. Indeed, Peter Stastny, who played in New Jersey until 1993 and then spent 2 injury-plagued seasons with St. Louis before retiring in 1995. And as I mentioned, what happened to Goulet, but it was also fitting that these two were inducted in this first year of eligibility, and it was the same year, 1998. And well, there's Joe Sakic, who many say, and I agree, far exceeded his expectations. And well, the happy ending I was talking about? Well, after many changes with the Nordiques among players, management, coaches, some risky trades that actually paid off, and continued to make big draft picks, by 1995, the Nordiques were one of the best teams in the league, but playoff success had eluded them, as they still hadn't won a playoff series since 1987. So then they made another big change. They changed cities. The Nordiques moved to Denver and became the Colorado Avalanche. And Sakic, the man they built this whole thing around, was the team captain and led the Avalanche to the Stanley Cup in their first year in Denver in 1996 and then another one in 2001. The Avalanche wouldn't win another Stanley Cup until 2022, and their GM is Joe Sakic. Any success this team has had for the past 30 years is owed to this man. Sakic was also a first ballot Hall of Famer as a player in 2012. And yes, I know Guy Lafleur is a Hall of Famer, but he was already in when he joined the team, so shut up! Sorry. Well, that does it for our look at the team that was even below the bottom of the barrel, but I guess had to hit truly below the bottom to even get to the bottom and reach the top again. Well, you know what I'm saying. And it started and ended with the great Joe Sakic. What other lowly clubs should I cover, if you dare ask? Leave a suggestion in the comments. In the meantime, hit like, share the video, and please subscribe to the channel. Until next time, I'll see ya!